So we're going to be talking today less about HIPAA, but more about confidentiality. I by no means am a HIPAA expert, and so I'm not going to proclaim to be, but I do believe I know a lot about confidentiality, which to me for this organization is essentially important. Like, I think that customer service is probably the most important thing that all of you do, you know, pleasing the people that we come in contact with, making sure that the people we come in contact with feel good about the services that ESI provides. But part of that also is confidentiality, having an atmosphere that people feel that the information that we have about them is safe and isn't going to be divulged to other people. So regardless of the place where you work and what entity of the organization, all of you are bound by the same levels of confidentiality. And I think that that's probably the most important thing that we get out just right away, is it doesn't matter if you're driving for Meals on Wheels, or if you're cooking at the senior center, or if you're in the house doing intensive case management. Everybody in this room, including me as a board member, is bound by the same standards of confidentiality. And so if you don't take anything else away today from anything that we talk about, take that away. Is that everybody is being held to the exact same standards. So what I would like to do in the next 25 minutes, because I know that everybody is incredibly busy. Some of you are probably getting ready to go home. Some of you probably have a stack this high of people to call back on your desk. I get it. When I used to work for the Alzheimer's Association, coming to things like this absolutely put me over the edge, because I knew that while I was in these, my phone never stopped ringing. And so I get that. What I would like to do is I would like to spend just a few minutes defining confidentiality. Just what is it? What are we talking about with it? And then what I would like to do is to talk a little bit about what are some strategies that you can use in case people are challenging you about confidentiality. And then finally, I want to open it up to questions, just to make sure that everybody in this room is on the same page, that the way that I'm understanding it, it's the same way that Molly's understanding it, it's the same way that Julie's understanding it. Does that sound like a good plan? All right, so when we talk about confidentiality, somebody define it. And Amy, you're not allowed, because you're a social worker and you should know. So somebody
maybe you should
define,
have her then, since she knows.
you're not either. All right, because if you two fail the answer, I'm going to cry. All right, so somebody define for me confidentiality. Just what is it?
You want us to raise our hands?
I don't care, you can just blurt it out. Yeah.
Oh, when somebody tells you something, it's something that it's meant to be kept to yourself, not to be told to everybody around you.
Okay. So when we are talking about confidentiality, we are talking about keeping private client information private, keeping client information private, not sharing client information with another person who does not need to know. Okay, and that need to know is a really, really important piece of it. Because there may be a time that Ashley is working with somebody, getting them hooked up for services, and they're going to be coming to the senior center for a meal, right? But maybe they're going to have special dietary needs. Maybe there's going to be something unique about them that Frank's going to need to know to serve that client to the best of his ability. Or maybe you're going to be delivering Meals on Wheels, Ryan, and Ashley knows something about this sweet old lady in Solon that you need to know. That's different, because within this organization, there is client sharing. And sometimes people are on a need-to-know basis. But the bounds of confidentiality stop with that. When we talk about confidentiality, it's another really important piece of that is not revealing identifiable information. So when we talk about the identification or the identifiable information, we're talking about a person's name, age, location where they live, other significant people in their lives, or anything about that case that could clue somebody in that they know who that client is. All right, so it's all of that information is considered to be confidential. So when you're looking at the people that you're serving, if you are going home and talking to your wife, let me give you guys an example, and you're talking about one of your clients, but you're providing enough detail that your wife could identify them, you've just violated confidentiality. So it's providing information so that the identity of that person could be known. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. One of the things that we have to recognize that within an organization like this, some of you may be having client discussions because you're on this need-to-know basis. So I'm going to use Ashley and Ryan as an example. There may be times that Ashley's gonna need to call you up and say, you know, Ryan, this woman you're gonna be delivering Meals on Wheels to, she's really frail. It's gonna probably take her double the time to get to the door. I'm just letting you know so you don't leave. Okay, I'm sure you've heard that one before. Okay, that's an appropriate level, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Ryan has the right to go tell Kenny, because Kenny's not on a need-to-know basis. So even within this agency, there's going to be certain people who are going to know certain things that other people simply don't know. And that's, again, another important piece of confidentiality. Now, the way that I was trained, and I'm going to put that out here, the way that I was trained, the only person from an agency standpoint who needs to know everything, or really has that right to know, would really be a supervisor, because of the fact that the buck stops with them. So if there's an issue with that dear lady who's not getting her meals because you're not waiting, Susan would need to know. So in that case, that confidentiality, hey Heather, could be expanded. Okay, are we all on the same page with this? All right, so need to know basis, no identifiable information, and certain people within the agency are going to have different pieces of information about certain clients. And all of you need to get very used to saying to somebody, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about that because that's confidential. We even do that at the university with students. That when we have a discussion about students, that if Ashley was in my class, but Heather was not an instructor who had Ashley as a student, Heather, we would ask to excuse herself from that discussion because she's not on a need-to-know basis. And that just needs to start being the culture of this organization, that people are going to find out information, you excuse yourself out of those discussions. Now, the one person in here, the people who are in here who are in tough positions are anybody who answers the phone. So Heather, I know I call you, you're picking up that phone. Carol, I love calling you because I always can tell you're smiling on the other end of that phone. You guys are in tough positions because you guys are the ones, when the clients have a crisis, somebody needs something, they're calling you, or their families are calling you. And you're the ones who are fielding people coming in and out of this agency all the time. So you all are actually, I think, in some of the most difficult positions when it comes to confidentiality, because your position doesn't necessarily say you need to know all this, but by the nature of your job, you know everything. You all probably know a lot more than even what the case managers know. And I know that that's simply from the agencies I've worked with. That person who answers the phone gets a lot of information. So I would say for you guys, the burden of confidentiality is incredibly high, because you have to make sure that you're going directly to that case manager or directly to the chore supervisor and saying, hey, I know this, and then you'll leave it at that. Okay? So questions about that before I move on?
Not a question, but a comment when
Yeah.
we were talking about the kinds of things that make them identifiable. I was having a conversation the other day, and I wasn't using any names, any addresses, anything like that, but because there were some circumstances in
Yeah.
their case that all of a sudden I'm going, somebody could know that person by virtue of the circumstances that we're talking about. You know, in Cedar Rapids, it's a big town, but you know, in this instance, it was somebody in Cedar Rapids. It was not a client, it wasn't related to work. But when I was having this story and this conversation, I thought this person might even know who I'm talking about, and it probably shouldn't.
Absolutely. So that's how specific you have to be. Now, one of the things, Judy, you just kind of sparked something in my head that I think is important, is how many of you have run into one of your clients out in public?
Yeah.
Okay. So the way that I was trained, and I'm going to preface it with this, the way that I was trained is you all don't have a right to acknowledge that client in public unless they acknowledge you, unless they acknowledge you first. And I do a lot of training over at the med school, and I do training in the physical therapy department all around this issue of confidentiality and professional boundaries. And the example that I always use is, what if the person that client was with did not know that they were getting ESI services? So let's say they didn't know they were going down to the senior center for meals. They didn't know that. They thought the person was completely independent, cooking on their own, etc. And out of nowhere, you go up and say, hey, how's it going? It was great seeing you the other day. How was that meal? You may have unintentionally, and that's a really important word, unintentionally violated confidentiality because you shared that information. The same thing comes into play with case management. The same thing comes into play if a family comes through these doors for services. Our human nature is to want to acknowledge them. That's our human nature, right? We want to be friendly, kind, loving, generous people. But we have to recognize that that person may not want that. And we have to respect that. And I always believe, and it may be something that you all as an agency would like to have some staff meetings about. I'm not going to tell you if it's right or wrong. But many of the organizations that I used to work at that were just like ESI, part of our service to families, part of our service to clients, was to share with them, your involvement with us is confidential. What does that mean? That means when I go out to do chore at your house, I'm here as an ESI professional. If I run into you at the mall, I obviously would love to say hi to you, but only if you want to say hi to me first. Because I want to respect the work that I do with you, that maybe you don't want others to know. And I think that that's a discussion that as ESI grows and ESI evolves and ESI develops, that you all as a staff are going to have. I'm not going to tell you what's right and what's wrong, but I do think that that's an important discussion at some point that you all have, because you will have a client. You will have a client who doesn't want to be identified. If you haven't yet, you will. And the last thing you want, or maybe their family doesn't want you to identify them. So at some point, you're going to run into somebody who's going to have a very different philosophy than maybe what feels natural for each one of you to do. And I think that's a really important discussion to have. So thoughts or questions about that? Just reactions. What do people think? Does that sit well with you, or does that feel kind of, I don't know how I feel about that.
It feels kind of,
Talk about that, Carol. What feels kind of...
I'm Nancy, but yes, I'll
Nancy, oh, I'm sorry. Carol's over there. I should know that, shouldn't I?
That's okay. It feels, because it's very difficult. Iowa City's a very small town.
You bet.
And I know lots of people from my old job as well as this job.
Yeah.
And if you walk down the Hy-Vee aisle and you see Joe Blow, and you're walking right up to him, and I can't say hi, how rude is that?
Yeah, you bet. Doesn't it feel that way? I agree with you. It feels like you're being rude, and it feels like you're being a little arrogant, and it feels
That's
like you're
exactly
being
right.
incredible. Absolutely, and I totally appreciate that.
Uncaring.
Uncaring.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to care about you, and now I'm not saying hi to you in public.
Absolutely, and I totally get that, because you know what? I agree with it.
Oh, yeah.
But I always think, hang on, Carol, so I don't forget my thought. I can't do two things at once.
Okay.
I always think, though, what's going to happen?
Oh, sure.
What's going to happen if that person didn't want to be acknowledged?
Sure.
Because what's immediately things going to happen is they're going to say, who's that?
And I'm not saying that he's with 3 other people. I'm saying he's by himself, and you walk down the aisle, and you meet him face to face.
One of the things that I always like to do when I run into situations like that is I will do a very generic response.
Sure.
Hey, how you doing? And I keep on walking.
Yeah.
You know,
So that's all right to say,
That's
hey,
what
how are you?
that's one of the things. I think it's perfectly fine to give a the same
Not hi,
the same
Sherry,
way.
how are you?
Yeah,
But
the
hi,
same
say
way
hi.
that I would probably do.
For
You know,
everybody.
like with Julie, my gosh, I knew I should know her from somewhere, but she probably, wasn't sure what the relationship was, so she would have gotten them all, hey, how you doing, right? Because I wouldn't want to put myself out there too much.
And that's okay.
That is, but it's the second you say,
Their name.
hey, how are you doing, Julie?
Yeah.
How was that chore
I just
service
wanted
last
you
week?
to say that.
Yeah, but how was that chore service last week?
Yeah. Oh,
The
yeah.
second you connect it, now you've just violated confidentiality. One of the things that I always like to do though with my clients, and maybe I'm just rigid and strict, but I think it's a good practice, is I would always talk about these things in advance. To me, this is a discussion to have in advance. That's part of good service. So as you're setting up chore services for Mrs. Smith, okay, and you know you're sending out a great volunteer, part of your assessment, part of your evaluation could be is, Mrs. Smith, just so you know, the policy of ESI
Yeah.
is
Well,
that we
it's written on
don't
my stuff,
share that information. We don't share information, all your information is confidential, which even extends into public. Is that something that you're comfortable with, that your chore worker and you are going to have a relationship when they're out there doing your services? But should you run into your chore worker in public, they're not going to say hello to you unless you initiate it, because we want to keep your identity protected. To me, that's a very important discussion to have at some level, and that's actually the tightness of confidentiality. Okay, but I think that you have to, this is kind of to me like it's a big pill to swallow. And it's kind of, you have to evolve into your comfort with it. But again, I will mark my word, and I promise you, for every one family you have that's okay, you're going to have another family who's not. And I can tell you as a daughter, if I'm coming to you all for services, for my mom, I'm going to want my mom's identity protected 100%. And all you need to do is to get one crazy like me in here, and now you've got yourself into a pickle.
So why, say Mrs. Smith comes to me for tour services.
You bet.
She comes to me. She says, hello, I'm Mrs. Smith, and blah, blah, blah. And then she says, on my form, it says emergency call person, and that's her son. But her son doesn't know that she's called me for services
You bet.
because he hasn't called.
Yep.
And he calls up and he says,
Yep.
hey, my mom needs services. Can you do that? And I can't say she's already got services.
Nope. That's part of
Okay.
confidentiality.
Well, I just
Yeah.
want to
No.
read that.
So one of the, yes, you're not. So unless Mrs. Smith gives you what's called a release of information,
Yeah, we don't have that.
and that's something that you as an organization really should have. You really need to have a release of
Well,
information.
we do in case management.
You really need to have it extended throughout the agency. So that if Mrs. Smith is my mom, and she calls you on her own for services,
Yeah.
but she doesn't want me to worry. She doesn't want me to
Yeah.
worry, right? She doesn't give you permission to tell me and I call. You may have just put yourself into the middle of one hot mess
Yeah.
because maybe my mom and I don't get along, right? And so you want to make sure.
Maybe an appropriate way to handle that within my little purview is there someone we may call or is
What
there
you may want to
someone
say is
we
Mrs.
can
Smith.
release information to?
Yeah, so what
You
you
want
want
to get it in writing?
Yeah, and so what you'd want to do is to get a release of
Because we
information
don't
form.
even have that.
That's just
We do have one. We do
I would-
have one, it's just not.
But I
we do
don't have it, yeah.
Yeah, so we need to get you that, but it would be a release of information that you say to Mrs. Smith, when Tom's gonna come out, in case of emergency, we need you to sign this, which releases us, or gives us the opportunity to call somebody. Additionally, if your daughter calls with questions about Tom's service, because we know it's amazing, but just in case, right, she wants you to do more, just in case, right, do we have permission to share what Tom's doing?
Yeah.
And that's that's a safety thing for this organization, to have that type of a release of information.
It's even like Meals on Wheels too.
Absolutely. So like, I'll give you an example for Meals on Wheels. My grandmother died in her house alone. 1 Meals on Wheels arrived, nothing. 2 Meals on Wheels arrived, nothing. She wasn't answering the door. It was when the Meals on Wheels arrived 3 times and they were still sitting outside the door that they initiated the police to come in and they found my grandmother. What's amazing is with that Meals on Wheels agency is that they weren't notifying my mom, that they weren't getting a hold of my grandmother because my grandmother hadn't signed the release of information form. So the release of information form, it was a great form. It actually said, if we try to deliver a meal and you do not answer, may we have permission to call that emergency contact. Well, we didn't know until after the fact my grandmother had refused to sign it because she didn't want any of us worried.
Right.
So 3 days worth of meals came before my grandmother was ever found, and we had to be notified by the police. So again, this is much more of an organizational thing with this release of information that's really important.
So if we do need to contact the police,
Yeah.
Tom comes in and says, this client didn't respond, and I go out there every day, or every week at this time. So when we contact the police, because it's law enforcement, that allows us to do that, right?
That's an emergency situation.
Exigent circumstances.
Yep, you're safe in that one. So let's talk a little bit about how you get out of these situations where a person is pushing you for information. They are pushing you and pushing you and pushing you, because I know what that's like. The number of times I've had a son call me up and say, I know you're working with my mom because I see your business card on her table. Okay, right? People are gonna do that. People are gonna call because they're concerned. I'm worried about my neighbor and I saw your caseworker out there. How do we get out of those situations? One of the things that I do is I always validate that person's concern. Obviously, that son is calling me because he's worried, right? He is concerned and he is worried. And so, John, I hear that you're very worried about your mom. And I am so glad that you called us because we are the person who can help your mother. However, because of confidentiality, I'm not at liberty to talk with you about your mom's circumstances, or even if your mom is one of our clients. Because I don't have the ability to do that. What I'm more than happy to do, though, is to sit down with you and your mom together, and we can talk together.
So when John gets terribly pissed at you,
Absolutely.
what do you say? What's your next
My
rebuttal?
next one is, you know what, John, you have every reason to be upset because I know how much you're worried about your mom. I validate that how pissed he is, right? Because he is. He's very angry. But to reiterate, I don't have permission to talk to anybody about a case without something signed from that older adult. And unfortunately, that's the bounds of the confidentiality. But I want you to know that I would love to help you with your mom, and I would love to meet with you and your mom. But I need to get your mom's permission to do so. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
It's hard,
It's hard.
but what will happen, again, what will happen is for every old lady, every Mrs. Smith out there, right, who's fine, you're gonna have a whole group of Mrs. Smiths who aren't. And you have to remember that you all don't know what's going on in these relationships. Does that make sense? You don't know. I'll give you a case example. My grandmother who died, Meals on Wheels volunteer founder, had my mom as her daughter, her power of attorney, and had my uncle and his wife, who were literally stealing from my grandmother. Stealing from my grandmother. And they would, when my grandmother fell, broke her hip, they would go into her house and steal things out of it. We knew it. She would go to the hospital, my aunt and my uncle would go to the hospital and try to get my grandmother to sign over power of attorney, change the will, all this stuff, right? So my mom, as the power of attorney, was terrified, constantly terrified at what was going on behind her back that she didn't know of. So let's put ESI in that situation. Ashley's my grandmother's case manager, right? She's trying to do everything she can. My mom doesn't air any dirty laundry. You know, a good Norwegian Lutheran from Minnesota just does not do that, right? She doesn't air any dirty laundry, so as much as she's told Ashley is, you know, my brother can be difficult. My brother can be difficult, but I kill him with kindness. Such my mother's statement. So Ashley now gets a call from my Aunt Margaret. Oh, Ashley, you know, I'm trying so hard to help Gladys out, and Ashley starts to tell Margaret all this information. What could Ashley have unintentionally done? Not only breached, but she could have set my grandmother up for huge manipulation. Does that make sense? So you have to recognize that in these conversations, that son may be so angry, but we don't know the context of everything that's going on. And through our desire to help, we can oftentimes hurt unintentionally. And I think that that's part of that discussion, is saying, I want to help, I want to meet with you, I want to talk with you and your mom. We can have a range of services, but I have to have your mom's permission.
Okay, they call in here.
Yeah.
They're yelling and screaming at me.
Absolutely, I know. You got the worst job.
Who do I send that person to?
Absolutely. So Carol, that's a great question. So you get that daughter on the phone, right? You get Margaret on the phone, right? And she is hot because she is not getting that information. Get her to a supervisor. Get her to Judy, right? Judy's not available. Is Ashley available? Is another one of the case managers available?
And if they aren't, go to Susan?
Absolutely. I would say, you know what? I can tell that you really need to talk with somebody right now, and I want to make sure that I get you to somebody who can help you. That's as much as you need to say. Because if they're going to yell and scream and rant because you're not providing that information,
Yeah.
get them to somebody who can explain to them in a very kind way, we want to help you. That's the message. We want to help you. But we have to have permission from our client. That son is not your client. The grandmother, my grandmother, is your client.
See, how do you
Does that
say
make
that?
sense?
Because it seems like you're already breaching, because you're referencing that they're already a client. Like, you can't even confirm
You
or deny.
can't confirm. No, you can't confirm or deny. So you can't confirm or deny. But in your head, you have to be thinking, who's my client? Who's my client? The older adult's my client. But you're right, you can't confirm or deny. All you can say is obviously you're concerned about your mother. I appreciate that you're concerned about your mother. I am more than happy to talk with you and your mother together. But I am unable, and this is a key phrase, I am unable to talk to anybody about anybody else's case or to confirm or deny somebody as my client because of confidentiality. And that's something that's very important to this agency. And I always, when I worked at the Alzheimer's Association, and I would always turn it around and say, and I'm guessing that that's something that you would find important if I was working on your case. You know, put it back on them. They wouldn't want me doing that to somebody else, right? And again, people are going to be angry. People will get mad. But you know what? What's the alternative? I can promise you, agencies will be set up for huge issues if you violate confidentiality. I would rather have that mad son than to have that mad mother who feels like you have completely betrayed her and they go after your organization.
Right.
Does that make sense? What would you rather have? One mad son, or the community being told ESI doesn't respect confidentiality? I'll take that mad son any day. Because usually when you meet with them, they calm down.
And if that mother goes down to, say, like the senior center, she's gonna tell every single person that sits at her table, and then every single person's gonna tell.
You'll never believe
every other
what they
person after
did.
that.
Absolutely. You'll never believe my son, who I don't even like, he's a drug addict. I can already hear it, right?
Yep.
Called. And so now what every older adult's gonna think, don't call there.
One good word only gets to 7 people. One bad word gets to 57
Yeah.
people.
You bet. But it's really important. What Amy said is hugely important. You can't confirm or deny. Okay? The most you can say is, I am willing to speak with you and that person together. But I can't confirm or deny that we serve them. Yeah.
I have a lot of situations where son, daughter, aunt, uncle calls in for services for the client. In that case,
Mhm.
when I set up services for the client,
Yeah.
who's my client?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of those discussions that you need to have. So I would oftentimes have a daughter call me up because she's setting up services for her mom or her dad. Well, her dad has Alzheimer's and her mom's a caregiver, and her mom's just too overwhelmed to call. So I would always clarify that. I would always say, I need to know who is the decision maker. I need to understand who is the one who I'm setting up services for, and I always got the release assigned. So that if that daughter was going to be the one calling me, I needed to make sure that her mom was comfortable, because at some point I'm going to be interfacing with her mom.
Releases from both people?
Both people.
It's not who pays the bill, the
It's-
client is,
yeah.
right?
No.
It's not who's.
So you need releases from both people. And again, maybe I just got lucky. I didn't have people argue about that. People were almost thankful for it. They felt good about those releases. That was something that was really important to them, because they realized how serious we took their protection. And the second you explain it to them, they're almost like, well, thank you. I'm so glad that you're
Yeah,
explaining
it's just
that.
something that's not established for my particular.
You bet.
purpose.
And I think that, really, I mean this, Nancy, these issues evolve. And as organizations, I was actually just teaching this to my students on Monday. As organizations kind of evolve up a developmental model, these issues become bigger and bigger and bigger. Think about where ESI was 5 years ago.
Don't know.
Think about where ESI was 3 years ago. ESI has really evolved into a much more complex organization than even when I started on the board. So these types of discussions are a natural part of evolution within organizations, to say, what systems are working, what systems aren't working, what do we have to get in place for the protection of everybody. It's actually a really great place to be. It's a great place for an organization to have to be at this point, because it means that you're evolving into a much more complex system and structure. Does that help? So Carol, I want you, if you got that person on the phone who's just not letting up, refer them on.
And definitely don't say yes or no that this person is or not a client.
Just say to them, say, you know what, I'm not privy to client information. Even though you may know, because they may have called you 15 times, right? Say, you know what, in my position, I'm not privy to client information. And so I apologize, but I'm not the best person for you to talk to. And you can say all that with a smile on your face that I know that I can hear through the phone, right? I could always tell you that. You can say that, but to say, you know what, I can get you to Judy, and then define Judy's position. Judy is the supervisor
Yeah.
of our entire case management staff. So Judy, I just elevated all the way up. She is like so busy, right? But Judy, in her position, she's on a need-to-know basis what every single one of those case managers are doing. So she is the one who can help.
Okay.
All right, other questions about that? So again, it's easy. The best way to get out of it is to validate what you hear. I know you're worried. I know you're concerned. I hear that you're angry, whatever that may be. Let me get you to who you can help. Okay? Yeah.
Can we just briefly talk about elder abuse? So we get a call in, and if Shannon or Judy are not in case man, then I get the call. And I share with the person that I'm going to refer this over to the case management department.
Yep.
Then it goes to Heritage,
Okay.
okay? we don't have a signed release from anyone. Is it because it's elder abuse we can do that?
Well, no, because it's the way that the way the elder abuse program is structured. Elder abuse is run through Heritage. You all just have a contract.
Right, right.
So as a result of that, when you refer it to case management, you're referring it, when you refer it to elder abuse, you're naturally referring it to
Okay.
Heritage.
Okay,
And you don't need to explain that to them, but what I always like to say to a person when I was having to make that triangulation and
Yeah.
kind of do it, is I'm gonna be referring this on. You will hear from either Shanna Fercucci or Tracy Robertson. Both of them work in this area, and they're the ones who can help you.
okay,
So what you're doing is you're letting them know, these are the two people you're gonna be prepared to hear from,
all right.
okay? And that helps people a lot, because now they know who's gonna be on that other
Okay.
phone call.
All right.
Yeah.
I got another question. I know this happens out in the Meals on Wheels routes where a neighbor will come out and say,
Yeah.
well, you can leave so-and-so's meal here at my house.
Mhm.
Well, is that kind of a breach because we're gonna do that?
I think that Meals on Wheels I think that this is a bigger discussion than Meals on Wheels, how this whole process works. One of the great things about Meals on Wheels is it's kind of like a community protection program, that people are looking out for each other, people are checking in on each other.
That's
you know,
what these
You
people
bet,
do, but
absolutely. So I think that one of the things that you have to be aware of it in those types of circumstances is that usually those neighbors do know. So if you say, if Ryan says to that neighbor, oh, Mary's not home, she's at a doctor, or, neighbor says, Mary's not home, she's at a doctor's appointment, you can leave the meal here. I feel like it's not a violation of confidentiality if Ryan goes, okay, no problem, thanks. Now, if he said, oh, tell me how Mary's doing, last week when I saw her, she was telling me this, this, and this, that's a confidentiality piece.
Or if he goes next door when Mary isn't there, it says, I'm delivering meals for Mary, could you
Where's-
leave the food for her?
That's different,
That's
yeah.
different.
that's
That is
because
different.
that's what,
Yeah, it's
I'm
different as
thinking
the
it
neighbor
happens
comes out,
maybe,
yeah.
but I don't know.
Well, and I think that we have to recognize in rural communities,
Yeah.
confidentiality is so different. When I did hospice care in this really rural town in Sullivan, Missouri, I had the gas station attendant, Sullivan, Missouri. The next closest biggest town was Bourbon, Missouri. And you can- But the gas station attendant, there was only one gas station in town, and that man, he knew everything about everybody.
Yep.
He used to open up the sliding thing as I was pumping gas, and he would yell out, hey, Sarah, how's John doing? I heard his condition's getting worse. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I'm just trying to pump my gas. And I would just wave, and I'd say, oh, glad you're concerned. And, we need more of you in the world, right?
Yeah.
He knew that I knew John. I knew that he knew I knew John.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell him anything, right? But I could thank him. So, I could thank him for his concern, right? So I think that within these rural communities, you have to be prepared to use some quick think strategies. Oh, thank you so much for being willing to take Mary's meal. That's awful kind of you. You have a great day. Out you go. Now, I can promise you that neighbor, she's gonna want you to talk. She's maybe gonna want you to say something. And I would just validate, she's a kind, loving, concerned neighbor. We need more people like you in this world. I really appreciate your commitment to the people of your community, while you're still not saying one thing about Mary. Yeah.
And then if a situation like what Miss Carol was talking about, if that does happen, do you also notify the person who you're bringing the meal to?
Yeah, just say your neighbor was very kind. She shared that you were at your appointment and she would be willing to take your meal for you. If she doesn't want that to happen in the future, I can guarantee you she'll tell you.
Oh, yeah. She'll let you know right
Yeah.
quick.
The other thing that I think is really important
Yeah, I
for
would
you
think
all,
so.
I would encourage you all to do, is when you get into these situations where you're just not quite sure, did I handle this right, did I not handle it right? Talk to each other. Talk to each other. Every one of us screws it up at some point. I've screwed it up. My gosh, I have parents who call me up at the university screaming about their students' test scores. My daughter told me that you're being unfair. And I have the same situation. They actually say identical. I have to say to that dad or that mom, I am so glad that you're concerned about your daughter's grades. But I am not able to talk to you about your daughter. I'm not even able to tell you if she's in my class. So what I would encourage you to do is to talk to your daughter about FERPA legislation. And if she is wanting you to call her professors, ask her to sign the release of information. And that dad will come at me and say, I know you know her. She showed me your email. And I'll say, you know what? I so admire you for advocating for your daughter. I can't say anything. So these are the times, but then I always go down and talk to my boss, okay, what do I do? And he's always like, great, now I'm gonna get the phone call, and 9 times out of 10, his phone's ringing, you know? And he has to say the same thing. So when you're in these situations, if you don't know you handled it well, if you worry that you did something wrong, just talk to each other. Say, you know what, this is what I did, was this right, was this wrong? Call me, we can talk through it. This is part of problem solving, it's part of really strengthening these skills. And again, I screwed it up. I'm sure Ashley has screwed it up. I'm sure Judy has screwed it up. We all have screwed up. We all have, because we're in the moment, we think we're doing the right thing and we make a mistake. But that's part of the learning process, to be able to own that we've made a mistake. You know, I just made a mistake a couple of years ago. I had a dad and mom both show up at my office door. And I was like, so blindsided. I don't have parents show up at my office door, and they were not happy. They drove all the way in from Chicago to talk with me about their daughter not getting admitted to the school social work. You know, and I'm standing at my door, and I have these 2 parents there, and I said, without even thinking, I said, you know, I'm really sorry she didn't get in. It was a tough pool. Second I said that, I gave too much information because I actually admitted she applied. Okay, then I had to take a step back, and I was like, oh, Sarah, I shouldn't have said that. But I was in that moment, I made a mistake. So, you know, those we have to be willing to learn and grow and know how to respond. So other questions or thoughts for me?
When you say if you're not quite sure that you did something wrong, talk to each other, are you talking about if I said something to somebody and I'm like, oh, Julie, you know, I said this and this, or should I go directly to my supervisor and say?
I would do either. I think that we
Either
can
way.
learn so much from each other to say, like, I always believe consultation is such an important thing to say, Julie, this is the way I handled it, and I don't know if this was right. What do you think? Should I have done something different? Part of that's learning from each other, and now what you're doing though is you're also helping Julie learn, oh boy, what am I gonna do if I'm in that position? And you know what? I never fault people for trying. I never fault you for that. And if you did mess it up and you did violate accidentally, we can come up with a strategy for how to resolve that. But as part of that learning process, as part of the learning process, the people in this room who are on the biggest hot seat are the case managers. There's little forgiveness for them. And I don't mean that in a mean way, not to put any pressure on you, Ashley, but there's a sense within their positions that they should know better. Okay, and I have to be really honest. If Judy called me up and said Ashley violated confidentiality and I got screaming angry family, I'm guessing Judy probably would know my first thing is she should have known better. No offense. You know, because of their handling such sensitive confidential information, and their training has put them in a position that they've had different levels of training. But I think that, again, we all are on this learning continuum. Sound good?
I have a question, because we, in case management, we obviously have releases, and we have a supplemental release so that we get everybody that we could possibly think of. But we're also working with people pre-admission to case management
bet.
as an agency, and we don't do releases for them.
I would do releases. I think that you need to standardize your packets. So if you're seeing somebody through Elder Answers, there needs to be a second that person becomes a client of Elder Services. Okay, not that I have some few quick questions, I'm just gonna call you up and pick your brain for a little bit. That's not a client yet. But the second they become a client of ESI, we need to have a standardization of that type of information so that everybody's protected. Does that make sense? You know, the one thing I used to get into at the Alzheimer's Association is I would have people say, you know, I'm calling on behalf of my mom. I'm going to have my mom call you. Okay, I'm going to have my mom call you because I think it would be better if you just talked directly to her. So then the mom would call me and would say, I'm calling because my daughter Susie told me to call you. Okay, so then that was always this weird position I was in because Susie had told me her mom was calling me. And her mom just called me because Susie told her to. So do I say to Susie, oh, yep, you know, I'm so glad your mom talked to me? You know, so what I would do is I'd clarify that. I would say when Susie said her mom was calling, I'd say, Susie, can I let your mom know that we talked? And I'd document it. So I didn't have a written release, but at least I documented. Susie indicated it was okay for me to share with her mother that she had called. You know, so I would document it because to me that was an important thing just to write down. So in case, you know, in my case notes that had been given permission. So and I don't know if Elder Answers has something that's structured with case notes. They should. If they don't, they should.
Well,
but like with me, you know, I can think of one person, I'm just thinking of one person so I can use an example. Daughters call, daughter says, I want home services for my mom. I say, can I call your mom directly? Yes, you may call your mom.
Yeah.
May call her directly, but please send the forms to me because she can't see.
Mhm.
No. So send the forms to the daughter, I talk to the mom, find out what she wants. Daughters fill it out, and mom can't see.
Right.
Okay? And they put on it, please forward any bills or anything like that to me.
Yep.
Is that,
Yep, I would document that though, Carol. Like, I really think,
Nancy.
Nancy. I don't know why you're trying to call you. I would document, I'm not looking at your sign. I would document it. I would document it.
well, it's written on the form.
Yeah, but I would, if like you need to make sure that all that's like clearly articulated in there, and then I would still probably ask for a release, a
Okay.
mutual release. Because again, that daughter may be sharing things with you that she doesn't want her mom to know or the mom
Sure.
wouldn't be comfortable with.
Right.
You know, and I think that, and vice versa, maybe that mom is just like, God, my daughter's so overbearing, you know? So I think that it was important to have habits with both ways.
Yeah.
And again,
Balanced.
evenly balanced, absolutely.
Well, it's something that, you know, I've asked a little bit, I know I asked somebody particularly, is my information under HIPAA? They said, not really. And I'm thinking, why different? And so I kind of treat it like that with all the form I have, but I don't have.
Yeah, I just think that release is an important thing.
We just need to do something standard.
But I need to clarify something. If your department itself isn't under HIPAA, but
Yeah.
this agency is.
Yeah.
You're right.
Okay.
And so if you violate it, it's still gonna come back to this agency.
I know, so I need a release form.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm saying is, I think that the work that Nancy does,
Uh-huh.
she needs a release.
Yeah,
I think
and
that that's
Heather can
gonna be a
provide
really
that.
important thing, and, you know, I would definitely get with Judy, because I think she could look over it with you and talk a little bit about that.
And then maybe something like client's name, person's name, things can be released to
You bet,
their
absolutely.
names.
Because like in my grandmother's situation, my mom never would have given permission for one piece of that information to be shared with her brother or his wife. So if they even were at the house, like in this situation, it was so horrible. If they were at the house where that chore worker was there and that chore worker said one thing to them, besides just friendly, hey, it's kind of snowy out today, you know, that type of stuff, we would have become unglued. We had lawyers involved in everything because of how much stuff was being stolen. It was a mess. And so I think you always are protecting the worst case. And that's always, I think, the safest place to operate from. And again, 9 times out of 10, we're not gonna have to worry about it. But you get one of my family, you get my family in there, and now we got a mess.
So let me ask a question regarding release, because in the actual HIPAA Act,
Mhm.
depending on your agency, you
Yeah.
can have an all-encompassing release, or you can have it limited and you can select
Yeah.
what you want released and what you don't want released.
Yeah.
So what does this agency follow?
I think that's a Susan and David Bright question. And I think that when David Bright comes in here, I would certainly throw that out to him. And Susan, that may even be a board discussion, because I don't think that the board has even gone that far, Amy, but you're right on. Is, you know, this again, it goes back to organizational growth and development. ESI has evolved, and we've got to figure that
But I think the board
out.
has decided that, because on the confidentiality statement, everybody signs when they're hired. And that was in place before I came.
But I think that we need to relook at that, because signing a confidentiality statement and following HIPAA
Uh-huh,
are really not the same thing.
uh-huh.
And so I think that David needs to relook at that.
Okay.
And we may need to bring that up for a board discussion.
Sure.
Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Sarah, so much. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Sarah.
that.